Selling your business is one of the biggest decisions you will ever make, and it's not just about getting a good price. It's about timing, taxes, deal structure, and making sure you're set up for life after the sale. Whether you're thinking of selling now or just planning ahead, this video will walk you through everything a business owner should consider before making that sale. I'm Grady Cool, CEO of Cool Wealth Management. I help business owners build wealth and make smarter decisions with their money, especially during big transitions like this. Let's get into it. You want the best price. There's other things to consider, but let's be honest, when it comes to selling a business, that is the number one consideration. If you want to get the best price, then it's time to get prepared. Woo! When someone buys your business, they want to be able to come in and continue operations as if nothing changed. What's going to make that much easier for them is clean documentation and clean operations. Here are just a few things to ask yourself. Are financial receipts and tax documents in line? Is it easy to locate documentation for how to do the general operations? What I mean is there are plenty of things you do to keep the business running. Obviously, there are some things that are fairly obvious. Oh, someone's got to clean the tables. Somebody's got to put the files away. There are other things in your business that are a little bit more core to the operations that really aren't as obvious. For myself, with Cool Wealth Management, that might be something like, what questions do I ask clients in order to be able to come up with the recommendations that I do for them? And what process do I follow for making sure those recommendations are consistent between clients? This is going to be very specific to your business, but documentation is essential even if you have good employees sticking around. Another key question is, do you have documentation of your relationships and interactions with clients, suppliers, business partners, pretty much anyone touching the business? You may know your customers pretty darn well by now, but if someone else is coming in, they aren't going to know anything about them. And it makes it a lot easier for them to continue quality operations if they come in and they know basic things about them, like how long have you known them? How long have they been a customer? What are some basic facts about their preferences, but also their life? Kids, wife, from Chicago, basics. The same thing applies to other stakeholders, investors, suppliers, etc. The more information, the better. The last thing is make sure there aren't any major fires. Nobody wants to buy a business where they're losing customers or employees are quitting every 2 weeks. I'm sick of it here! Maybe not so much of that. A nice steady business is much easier to sell. Getting your business in line can take some time, but that leads to my next point. Giving yourself time makes it much easier to get a good price. While getting prepped can take some time, it's honestly more about market timing and shopping around. This is a little bit easier to understand with an example. This is Steve. He's 62. He runs a bar that makes approximately $2 million in revenue every year. He's considering retirement, but he isn't in too much of a rush. While he has relatively happy employees and he has regular customers coming back in, his books could use some work. Steve likes to make some special drinks, so some of their operations could use a little bit better documentation. Steve assumes that cleaning all this up will take approximately 6 months. Once he's good and prepped, Steve starts looking around for a decent buyer. If there's a recession, Steve's cool with waiting another few years before he goes and tries to find the best buyer so that he can get a better price. Otherwise, he's going to keep shopping around until he finds a good price that matches his expectations. If Steve had waited until 3 or 4 months before he wanted to retire, then he could have been in quite the little bind if, 1, he couldn't find a buyer, or if 2, there was a market downturn and it made it hard to get a good price. If your business is good and prepped and ready to be sold, the next big question you need to ask yourself is, what are you going to do after you sell the business? Most people assume if they sell the business, they're just done. No more working. Realistically, that's just not how it tends to happen. A lot of buyers are going to want to have you around to be able to, 1, make introductions, but 2, be able to answer questions about all the little things in between that your documentation just didn't cover. That being said, how many hours you work and how much control you have can vary widely. Some entrepreneurs choose to stay on with the business full-time for a year or 2 after they sell the business. Usually they lose control over making big decisions, but their opinions usually still given some weight given that they were able to grow the business to that point. Other business owners will only stay on part-time, generally just there to answer major questions. Then there are those that really are just completely done. The reason this is so important is that it becomes a large part of negotiations and dictates who you maybe want to sell the business to. I know a lot of business owners view their business, like me, like their baby. You wouldn't sell your baby to some scumbag who screws all your customers. At least, I hope not. So that means who you choose to sell to is a pretty big deal. The rise of private equity and venture capital has made this situation a lot more awkward for quite a few business owners. Usually, the best price available is going to come from a company with no soul. Their biggest concern is making money. That's why they can write big, fat checks. Depending on the type of business you have, that may or may not be an issue. One of private equity's favorite moves is to fire people and crank up output. If you run a solo business that's primarily held together by automation, this really isn't much of an issue. If you run a business that's held together by employees and you pay pretty nicely, then you might have to watch some of them be fired, and that can be pretty difficult. This extends even further to customers. While nobody's going to fire customers, they are going to give them less service and charge more. It just makes them more money. This is why some business owners will choose to sell to a smaller competitor or small company. They don't always have the money to buy you outright, so there may need to be some sort of financing deal to be able to make that possible. The nice thing about being well prepared and having time to shop around is it gives you all the leverage. If a prospective buyer isn't going to do what you want them to do, isn't going to pay you the check you want, or is just generally shady with all of their business deals, then you can just keep shopping for a better buyer. Make sure to be clear on what your priorities are before going into negotiations and what you're willing to give a little bit on. That way, you can get the best deal possible.